Hello. In this video, I'm going to talk a bit about shelling peas, what are sometimes called English peas, not to be confused with peas like snap or snow that we usually eat with the pods. In this video, I'll talk a bit about preparation, including storing raw peas, shelling them, washing them, and then blanching and cooking them, how to store them long term, provide a little nutrition information, and some recipe ideas. As far as storage goes, if you get your peas from the grocery store or the market, you'll want to refrigerate them in a plastic bag in the refrigerator, probably in the crisper drawer because they need some moisture and some cool air. And then if they are already shelled, as you can often find from farmers and farmers markets, you should use them within 2 days. And I'll talk about things you can do if you're not ready to actually eat them yet. Or if you have them in the shells, you can leave them in the refrigerator for 5 to 7 days raw. The thing to know is that the longer the peas are uncooked after they have been pulled from the vine, the less sweet they become. So if you can do something with them sooner rather than later, they're going to be a bit sweeter. You can often get peas already shelled. They may cost just a little bit more, although farmers often have very large equipment already that they use to shell these in mass quantities. So they may not charge any more, but they might because there is labor involved. Even if they're using equipment, somebody still has to be there to tend to that in addition to actually picking the pea pods in the first place. If you're trying to save a little money, then you might be able to get them in the pods, or maybe you're trying to grow them for the first time yourself and are picking them from your own garden. You can buy equipment yourself. The cheapest ones are maybe in the $30 to $35 range. That it's a crank style that you do by hand, that will do 1 or 2 maybe pods at a time. You can buy more expensive in the hundreds of dollars that are electric and will do them faster, and there are prices in between. Or you can just do like I do, and you can shell them by hand. I don't always shell my peas by hand, but I have not invested in the equipment because I just don't shell enough peas by hand since I'm not growing them in my own garden. If you're going to shell peas by hand, what you want to do is take a look at the peas, at the pods, and it's kind of hard to see here in the video, but there are basically 2 long sides with seams, and there's one that you should be able to see that the seam is actually more indented on that side. For this pod, it's this side facing toward the camera that is more indented. So once you find that, you just take this stem and you pull toward the indentation, and it should actually just start to open right up for you. And then once you've got it like that, you can just, from the top by the stem where you pulled, you can just gently open the rest of the pod yourself. Another way to tell if you're having trouble seeing which side is indented is to look at the shape of the pea pod. Most of them have just a slight curved shape to them. And so the bottom part that curves downward more is going to be the side that does not have the indentation. So the other way to figure it out is you can pull toward the side that would be kind of upwards like this, right? If you've got it curved like this, I'm pulling on the upper side. And now it's popped open for me up top, so I'm going to empty out the peas. I'm not going to shell my whole batch of peas like that. You can always go back and play that part again if you want to watch it again to get a sense of it. But here are the steps written out as well, so you could take a screenshot of that if you'd like. It's basically what I just did. And now once you've got all of your peas shelled, or maybe you bought them pre-shelled, you will want to wash them. Washing is really easy. If you're getting them from your own garden and you feel okay about it, like a lot of the instructions online don't even say to use anything like vinegar. They say to just gently rinse your peas in some cold water. But because I get mine from farmers, even when they're coming fairly directly, I like to soak all of my produce in at least a little bit of vinegar. So my shell peas, I will soak in some cold water with about a tablespoon of vinegar. It's enough to help to lift anything, as I've said in other videos, from the peas. And then it's much easier to rinse. And you just rinse them for about 30 seconds. And then if you want to do something with the peas, if you're not actually ready to eat them yet, you can do what is called blanching. I've talked about this in other videos. You can blanch just about anything you want to freeze. And some things don't need to be blanched, but peas you will want to blanch. You don't want to freeze them longer term for storage without at least blanching them, or you can cook them fully. Blanching basically stops the maturation process so that when you get them back out later, they are somewhat cooked and you can cook them some more, but it doesn't cook them completely, because when things get frozen, they tend to lose some of their crispness. They don't usually lose their nutrition, at least not unless they've been in the freezer for a very long time. But if you blanch, it helps to stop the maturation. And I'll talk in a minute about how you can help to lock in the color of the greenness of the peas as well if you blanch them first. And then when you pull them out, they have not been fully cooked, so they're not quite as soft. And you're not necessarily going to end up with a bunch of mush if you cook them for a long time in something. So if you want to blanch them, once you've washed them, you want to bring a pot of water to boil, put the peas in the pot, and you want them to just about cover by an inch. If you can see in this picture, there's about an inch of water covering the peas, and you want to bring that to a boil. And if you want to lock in the color, add a pinch of baking soda and a pinch of salt. This helps to lock in that green color. It's not going to break down and get lost in the cooking process. Only cook them for a minute and a half. And so you want to have a cold water bath ready to go, because once the minute and a half cooking is done, you want to remove them and drain them, and then immediately transfer them to the cold water bath. Basically, with blanching, you put something in a cold water bath to stop the cooking process for the same amount of time that you had it boiling. So you don't need to have a ton of water for this, since it only needs to be a minute and a half. For larger portions of the vegetables that are bigger, like pieces of broccoli, for example, you might need to have more water or actually have some ice in your bath. And then drain them after that minute and a half, and they're ready to freeze in airtight containers. I usually just put mine either in a normal plastic container with a lid, or if I don't have enough of those for storage space in the freezer, I will use Ziploc bags. And then when you pull them out to use them, they can defrost pretty quickly if you just put the whole container in some water. Any temperature is fine, because they will defrost very quickly if you just put them in some water. You can do that, and you don't even need to think ahead. You can put them in some water to defrost right in the container while you're getting some other things ready to go to cook. If you want to fully cook your peas so that you can go ahead and eat them right away, either on salads and different cold things with raw vegetables where you just want the peas to be cooked and ready to eat, or in things that call for frozen peas that assume that the peas have already been cooked, then you want to go ahead and cook them fully. And you basically do the same thing, but you cook them longer, 6 to 8 minutes, and then you don't need to put them in the cold water bath. If you blanch and freeze your peas and pull them back out, it's perfectly fine. to use them in any recipe that calls for frozen peas, they will cook perfectly fine for you, because once they've been frozen, they soften up a bit anyway, as all things do when they freeze. So if you freeze them in that airtight container, they should keep well for 6 to 8 months. After that, they will still be fine to eat. They might get freezer burned if the container isn't airtight. What will happen is after 6 to 8 months, they'll start to lose some of their nutritional value. So they won't be quite as healthy. They might lose some of their flavor, but you could still eat them. So why peas? You might like them and then I don't have to convince you to eat them. Or if you are trying to think of some things to add more nutrition and variety to your meals, peas are a great thing to add for additional nutrition because they are very low in calories and fat, but they have a decent amount of protein per half cup cooked peas, which is considered a full serving, a decent amount of fiber, and a little bit of iron even. And then there are just a variety of vitamins and minerals, which helps to bring some balance to your diet. So some things that you can do with peas, you can put them really in just about anything that you like that calls for vegetables, or even things that maybe don't call for vegetables that you hadn't thought about cooking them with meat before. You can add them to salads. You can add them to eggs. They provide healthy protein and fiber for these kinds of meals. A little bit of peas in your salad or your omelet means that you don't need as much of something that's going to have more saturated fat, like meats and cheeses. You can also add them to things like soups. Any recipe soup that you make, you could add some peas. You might want to reduce something else a little bit. So if you're adding a couple of cups of cooked peas, frozen peas to your recipe, you might reduce the meat a little bit or reduce one of the vegetables if there's a lot of potatoes or something in it. You can also make fried rice. There are lots of fried rice recipes out there. And then there are a lot of different cultures that use peas. So if you want to try different things, you can look for recipes with curries and different rice dishes. And all of these types of things will freeze as well. So if you don't want to just freeze a bunch of peas to use for later, or you could do a little bit of both, which is what I do. I usually freeze some peas to use for later, and I'll often make some of the soups I like that call for peas, like minestrone, in the summertime when they're fresh, and then I'll freeze them and can eat them later in the fall, since the pea season in central Pennsylvania is relatively short. So I'm going to share a couple of recipes here. I'm not going to cook either of these because they're fairly easy to make. And the real demonstration for this video is what to do if you need to shell the peas yourself. So here is a recipe. If you have your own favorite omelet recipe that you do already, you can always add peas to that, maybe reduce some of the vegetables like mushrooms and other things that are in it and add some peas instead. You can reduce anything that you would put in it, really, as far as bulky items like tomatoes, mushrooms, things like that. But this one calls for some seasoning to it. So you make an omelet here with things like onion, garlic, fresh ginger, and if you want a fresh chili to add some heat, and then some curry or some chili powder, depending on what you like, or you could try it both ways at different times. And then you want 1.5 cups of chopped vegetables of whatever your choice is, tomatoes, bell peppers, mushrooms. If it is something that takes a while to cook, then you might want to make sure it's blanched or cooked already, like corn, for example. But if you have things like tomatoes and bell peppers and mushrooms that really cook up fast anyway, you don't even need to worry about that. And then you'll add your 1/4 cup of cooked peas with 2 eggs, and you can follow the instructions here. It's fairly easy, especially if you've made an omelet before, and the peas are going to provide you with some extra protein. Also some fiber. So if you make this with the 2 egg omelet recipe, it'll serve 2 people if it's a main dish, or if you use it as a side dish with other things for breakfast, for example, with other favorite breakfast foods, or even for another meal with different things like meats and vegetables and things, or if you're having a party or a buffet type thing, a picnic, it would um, it would serve more people, probably about 4 to 6 if it's a side dish. The other thing you might do is, as I said, there are a lot of cultures that use peas. There are a lot of recipes from India, for example, where they already call for peas, including meat curries. If you like meat, adding some peas to that kind of recipe makes it more satisfying because the peas give you some protein too, but they also have fiber. And anytime you add fiber to what you're eating, you're going to be satisfied longer. So adding the peas will mean that you'll feel full longer. And a recipe like this, you can serve as a side dish. You can serve it with some meat if you want, or some seafood, or it can be the center meal dish because it has protein in it already. Rice has some protein, the peas have protein, and so do mushrooms. Really, any vegetables and fruits have some protein in them, just maybe not as much as things like meat and dairy. So this recipe is fairly easy. You saute your onion and then add in the olive oil, and then you add the garlic and the ginger and chili if you're using it. And then you add the ground spices and cook those a bit, and then add the tomatoes and let it cook and simmer just for about 5 minutes so that the tomatoes can take on the flavor of the spices. And then you add your mushrooms and your peas and some greens, probably some spinach or maybe kale, something like that. And it's a nice healthy dish. You can add some cilantro at the end if you'd like, but you don't have to. You can serve this by itself. I like to eat it just as it is. Since I don't really eat meat anymore, it's perfect as a main dish for me. I might eat some fruit, or maybe once in a while I might make a second curry dish if I'm feeling ambitious. But it's worth trying. Traditional would call for garam masala, but if you don't have that spice blend or are afraid to try it because you're not sure about it, chili powder is fine too. Lots of chili powder is used in India in these types of recipes, so that would be a fine substitution. So I actually made this recipe over the weekend and it's really tasty and definitely worth trying if you like curries and those kinds of spicy foods. So hopefully there have been some things here that have been helpful, including preparation and some ideas for how you might use peas this time of year, or even through the year if you're going to freeze some now to use for later. You can add them really to almost anything you already make that has meats and vegetables in them. Maybe just sometimes reduce other veggies or meats a little bit to make room for the peas in your recipe, or else increase things like seasonings and liquids to make sure that you have room. You can, as I suggest here, reduce the quantities of things like meat and then replace it with peas, or just find a recipe that calls for both. And then you've got a healthier protein option. It's not only better for you, it actually makes you feel full longer. And then you can also just look around, find different kinds of recipes to try. Lots of cookbooks you can get from the library and lots of recipes online that are definitely worth trying if you like peas. And even if you're not the kind of person that likes to eat them by themselves, which I know that especially the generations that have grown up having to eat peas by themselves plain, it doesn't necessarily appeal, but they can be really great when they're mixed in with a lot of different things like fresh fruits and veggies in a salad or in a soup or a curry of some kind. So enjoy, and I will see you next time for the next video.